How's it going, everyone? This is International Master Daniel Wrench. This is Chess.com, and this is the Everything You Need to Know video series here today to bring you the third installment on the Endgame. On that note, if you haven't watched the first two videos in this series, Everything You Need to Know About the Opening, as well as Tactics and Strategy, now's the time to do so, as our promise to you that this can be the one chess lesson in your life, if you are only to get one, would not be fulfilled if you have not watched the first two in this series. The endgame is the final stage of a chess game, and it is generally considered to be reached when most of the material has been traded, in particular, the queens. However, that cannot obviously be true for every endgame, as certainly there exist queen endings, perhaps with just the king and the queen and a few pawns. So, in designing this video and outlining it for you, we decided to organize it around the two most critical factors that define an endgame. These would be the factors that define how well you play the endgame, and that is king activity and the ability to create a pass pawn, or in some cases, the simple execution of an already existing pass pawn. So as we jump right in here, most of the technical positions and the practical ideas we're going to teach you are designed around executing and getting the most out of the king activity and your pawn play as you transition into the final stage. We hope you're ready, hope you got your popcorn, and you're ready to rock and roll, because we certainly are. Let's jump into talking about the active king. First thing we'd like to point out is something that many players overlook, and that is that your king is an important piece. Though it wouldn't be smart to bring the king out in the middle game, obviously, as he's also your most valuable piece and the one piece you can't lose. You should be aware that your king is a powerful piece and is actually the only other piece outside of the queen that attacks or controls every square directly surrounding it. The only other piece outside of the queen that does that. In some cases, the king even has the ability to target and trap minor pieces by himself. As we see in this case, a king has trapped the enemy knight in the corner. And here we see that your king even has the ability to execute a double attack tactic or fork tactic, as we saw in the Everything You Need to Know About Tactics and Strategy video. Here black will either lose the undefended knight or move the knight to safety, thus falling will be the bishop on f4. You will see throughout this video that the active king and the position of either an active or passive king can be the determining factor of either a win, loss, or draw in endgame. One example of the king position determining the result of an endgame would be this one here, as neither side can really make progress given that both kings are relatively active. Though white's king is slightly more active, because black can simply hold opposition by staying in front, the white king will not have the ability and will never find the ability to make progress. However, if we change the position of the kings even slightly, we see that white has the ability to win this endgame due to the fact that his king will reach the kingside pawns much faster. Note that there are really no other differences in this pawn structure or in this position outside of the position of the kings, but white is easily winning. After quickly entering, we will see that black's timing is just far enough behind, as white will get to the king's side and munch enough pawns to eventually promote and win the endgame. King and pawn endings are not the only positions where either the active or passive position of the king can be the deciding factor. Here we see a position where white would like to promote his passed pawn on h7. However, the rook on h8 must stay there to defend the pawn, and any passive movement of the rook will simply allow capture. The knight on f2 might also like to join the party and help white queen the passed pawn. However, at the current time, the knight has no way to enter play, and remaneuvering and redeployment of the piece may not help. In this position, white found the important move, in fact, the only winning idea, and that involved the activity of the white king on b3. What should be noted is that two of the criteria we listed at the beginning of this video as what defines an endgame are present in this position: a passed pawn and the need to activate the king. White played the move a4. This was a strong move, as at the current time, black is unable to give check to the black king, which would otherwise force it black, due to the fact that white can capture the rook. After black captures on a4, we see quickly that the white king now has the ability to enter into the game, where it otherwise previously did not because of the rook's restriction of the fourth rank. After a4 takes and takes, we see that the black king is unable to challenge the active white king due to the fact that if it leaves the 7th rank, white will move this rook with check, followed by immediate promotion. In this case, black's king has become a completely passive piece as it must hold the 7th rank in order to prevent progress, whereas the white king now has easy access into the game. This game was soon won by white after the moves rook h2, king to b5, rook h4, king to c5, rook h2, king to d6, and again we should have been able to see that black is unable to capture the knight on f2 due to the fact that immediately leaving the h-file would result in a loss after one of two ways. Simply moving the rook, followed by promotion, allowing black to give up the rook for the queen, and easily winning the endgame, as the rook is a much better piece than the bishop, or simply sacrificing the rook with check in order to force promotion through on the next move. In this position, after king to d6, black simply resigned, realizing that there was no way to take the knight on f2, nor was there any way to activate his own king for fear of check on the 8th rank as we highlighted, nor was there any way to prevent the plan of the white king reaching the g7 square, protecting the h7 pawn, and eventually releasing the rook from his duties so that this pawn may promote to a queen. To highlight this in an example, these might be the moves to end the game if black decided not to capture the knight on f2. Eventually white would find promotion for this pawn, immediately ending the game. Hopefully this example highlights clearly that one major advantage of an endgame is always a passed pawn, as the ability to promote a pawn into a higher rated piece, particularly the queen, is always a dangerous threat. Secondly, it should highlight for you that the king activity was eventually the deciding factor, as without the active king, white was unable to execute the advantage of a passed pawn. We see the need to use both an active king and to have a goal, which is to eventually promote your passed pawns, a very common goal in most endgames, as the deciding factors in this practical endgame. Almost all king and pawn endings where one side possesses an extra pawn should be winning. Though we do not have time to review all of the technique required in these positions, nor do we have time to discuss all of the practical ideas, the one position that all players should know is this one in front of you. White has king on the 6th, pawn on the 5th. When that structure is reached, with the king leading the way, the position is always a forced win outside of possessing a rook pawn, a corner pawn. In this position, if it is black to move, either one of these moves is met by king infiltration, with king to d8 being met by king to f7, and king to f8 being met by king to d7, followed by the pawn marching to victory. And even on white's turn, the king can simply sidestep and march the pawn forward, eventually placing black in a position where he must move and allow us to come forward, followed by promotion of the pawn. As we move on to slightly more complicated positions to discuss the nature of pawn play in the endgame, remember this position as one of your goals, as something you can always strive to achieve in endgames, as the king on the 6th, pawn on the 5th position wins, regardless of whose move it is. Outside of possessing a large material advantage in the endgame, or perhaps even a small material advantage as we saw in the last example, one of the biggest advantages one can have is that of a protected passed pawn. In this position, though both sides possess two pawns, white's structure is easily winning. The pawn on b5 is a solid rock. Black does not have the ability to ever rid himself of this thorn in his side. Why? Because the only way to ever take the b5 pawn would be to rid himself of the a4 pawn. But black does not have the ability to ever go chasing this pawn, as doing so would leave the b5 pawn to rush toward a queen. To simply highlight this point, we can shuffle the white king back and forth without even trying to show aggressive intentions towards black's extra pawn. Because we see that if black ever leaves the b-file, this white pawn pushes, and black does not have the ability to catch up with it. In this case, the black king is completely stuck, never being able to run too far to protect the rest of his army, as this pawn would queen, nor can he ever eliminate the pawn, as doing so would also allow the pawn to queen. In this position, white can simply come back toward the king side, eliminate the h7 pawn, eventually make his way back over to the queen side, and win the game. Another large advantage one can possess in the endgame, outside of material or that of a protected passed pawn as in the last example, is an outside passed pawn. Here we see once again the material being equal, with both sides possessing three pawns. However, white's pawn, being a passed pawn that is far away from the rest of the army, makes a huge difference, and it is a significant advantage. White can easily advance this pawn, using it as a decoy to force the black king away. And in doing so, the white king can infiltrate and be miles ahead of the black king in terms of the bigger prize. We see that an outside passed pawn, when recognized as an advantage, can be a huge problem for the opponent, as getting rid of so requires a long journey for the king and always leaves the rest of the enemy exposed. Recognizing the possibility to execute an outside passed pawn advantage allowed White to play a famous combination in this game. After capturing on f6, White first threatens to follow it up with a fork, and therefore head toward an endgame with an extra minor piece. However, Black did not have to capture back and simply took on c3. In this position, White continued the combination by capturing the f7 pawn before recapturing the rook on c3, and in this endgame, despite Black's slightly more active king, White is easily winning. That's because the potential to create an outside passed pawn exists with a 2-on-1 majority advantage. After advancing, Black eventually found himself in a position where he had no other choice but to allow White to create an outside passed pawn. White does so willingly just so that he can sacrifice it, as he has the knowledge that what really matters is whose king is closer to the other side of the board. Again, we see the outside passed pawn being much better than the central passed pawn, as it forces the king further away. Black can take the pawn, immediately allowing White to capture, followed by an easy win. Or Black can try to hold on a little bit longer by waiting, though eventually he will be forced to deal with this outside passed pawn monster, and in doing so, the black king will be too far to deal with White's threat. Recognizing the potential for a 2-on-1 majority in that last position allowed White to execute a brilliant combination. A majority exists when you have more pawns than the opponent on one side of the board, and that idea has dictated the play even in some very famous opening repertoires. For example, the Ruy Lopez or Spanish game, shown even in our first video, has one variation known as the exchange, where White's sole idea is to exchange the bishop for knight and eventually trade the pawns in the center. Without going any further to show the theory of this position, the main idea to highlight is that White's goal is a long-term one. White now has a 4-on-3 kingside pawn majority, and if best play followed from White's perspective, the pieces would be traded, eventually heading toward a position where Black was lost in the endgame because his 4-on-3 pawn majority is not as effective due to the doubled pawns on the c-file. As we learned in the tactics and strategy video, double pawns are a disadvantage due to the fact that they cannot protect each other and that they stunt progress. And in an endgame such as this, where White's 4-on-3 majority could dictate play, this could be a deciding factor. One final practical example is designed to show the potential of a passed pawn once again. Here we see that Black has an advantage due to the outside passed b4 pawn. However, White has established a blockade on the queen side. In this position, Black won easily, recognizing that his majority on the king side was real due to White's doubled pawns, leaving Black with a 2-on-1 outside chance. Black played the move h5 and went on to win very quickly, as this was a very strong move followed by g5 and h4. Note White's inability to deal with this plan. The main point being, recognizing an open file for a pawn is like recognizing a pretender, as it's been known to be called. A pretender is a pawn that no longer has an enemy pawn on the same file, and all it needs is the help from his majority in order to become pass. Combining these ideas of the last few examples should help you to recognize the potential for passed pawns in your own endgames and the practical ideas of how to execute them. In review, two factors dictate the play of all roughly equal endgames, and they are king play and power and passed pawns. As Nimzovich said, in the middle game the king is but a mere extra, but in the endgame the king is a principal. Activate your king at the earliest opportunity, use him to help your pawns advance, and remember the goal position of king on the 6th, pawn on the 5th, as it is a goal position for many endgames. Pawns are the soul of chess, according to Philidor, and if you recognize the potential for your majorities, you can create passed pawns all over the board. Remember the ideas of protected passed pawns, outside passed pawns, and push, push, push your passed pawns to victory. Everything you need to know about the endgame is now complete. We hope you enjoyed this video, and we will see you around on Chess.com.